Well, thank you all for being here today. And this is an esoteric topic, but I'm always prone to do that, even though I'm director emeritus of the Monitor Center and wrote a lot of books about monitors. My conclusions have changed about them, and it's all because of how well they actually worked versus how well people thought they would work. And that's a big issue when it comes to the major investment in monitors that was made by the federal government. They make 73 of them. Now, they don't finish them all. And as soon as the war is over, they are virtually worthless ships. And so this huge investment was taken advantage of by companies and so forth. But nevertheless, the little ship that saved the nation left an impact on the very concepts of the Civil War, and actually is part of why the Civil War is the beginning of the age of industrialization in the United States. You know, in building the Monitor, they actually practiced several different techniques that no one had done with something so big. Number one, they used the concept of Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts. The Monitor is built in about 15 different cities with all the parts showing up in Brooklyn. And, you know, they then had to put them all together. Some fit perfectly, some did not. This becomes an issue as we look at monitors afterwards. Now, this is the brainchild of John Ericsson. John Ericsson, even before the Monitor gets to Hampton Roads, will say to one of his partners, who happens to be a congressman, which we believe is a no-no, I think today, but nevertheless, he says, look, as soon as that ship gets down there and fights, we will get a contract to build 10 more ironclads, which is pretty amazing. That's confident because he believed in everything he did. However, his design number 1, design number 3, design number 5, 6, 7 were all flawed in many ways. Ericsson becomes a genius, of course. He invents, cannon. He invents, shell guns. He invents the propeller, screw propeller. He invents, a compression flush toilet. There are 30 patentable things on the Monitor, and they say about 100 more that he just didn't bother to try and patent because he gave all those patents to the U.S. Navy. So he becomes a millionaire as a result of the Civil War because of his inherent genius. So Ericsson believes in himself. He's a big egotist. And so this is going to lead to him believing in his overall design. Now, this is what's one of my proofs that Monitor is no good. And it's because, now this is a bad look at its hull, but this is, of course, the classic scene of the sinking of the Monitor. And why does it sink? Because it's poorly designed to go to sea. Ericsson didn't think about, it's got to get down to southern ports. That meant that getting there proved to be a tremendous problem because of the very design of the Monitor. Number one, we have an 18-inch freeboard. I don't know how many of you all been to sea, but 18-inch freeboards does not make you comfortable in heavy seas. Number two, the biggest flaw, I think, was, the Monitor is built in 3 parts: turret, armor deck, and then the hull. The trouble is the hull is only made out of 1-inch iron plate. It's attached by a row of 2 bolts to the armor deck. Now, what does that mean? It's only so secure. They don't use rubber to really seal it, so it's a leak point. But when you're in seas in seas like you see here, and they say the waves are as big as 30 feet high, your sleet, rain, frozen rain, snow, everything bad. And so your ship starts to immediately sink. It sinks because of a couple of reasons. Reason number one, the water comes right through the turret. And that water that comes through the turret goes right down onto the berth deck. So Monitor equals a wet ride. And that water, when it comes down, it only can be removed, and it comes through everything, by the way, but the water can only be removed by pumps. And these are steam pumps, and they have some of the finest steam pumps available. In fact, you go into the Monitor Center, you can see one of them, a Worthington pump, and they actually had two of them. They had a Andrews centrifugal pump. They had hand pumps. I mean, it's all, they know water's coming in. But the big issue is this union right there. And once again, you can go into the Monitor Center and see how it came in. So every time you rise up, they say it would drop down into the trough of the sea with a big bang. Now, when you're thinking the turret alone weighs 120 tons, so you're putting all that weight on this poorly mounted hull, and so it starts to leak. And in fact, not only does it leak, many of the crew members are fearing the ship is going to come apart because of that up and bang down. So the very overall design makes the Monitor really great for working in a harbor, but very bad to get it to those southern harbors. So that's one of the major flaws that we see with these monitors. This is the Passaic, and you can see the seas it survives. Now, this is the second type of monitor that will be built. Okay, that's those 10 monitors that Ericsson is talking about, saying, "Oh man, we're going to get all these contracts guaranteed." And so, basically, what will happen? The Passaic survives, but you can see how it's engulfed by water. They have to throw off all their cannon shells. They have to throw off this, throw off that to try and stay afloat. Now, before this ship is even designed, the Passaic class, people start to complain about the Monitor. And probably the biggest complainer about the Monitor is going to be a man known as William Nichols Jeffers. And Jeffers is the fourth commander of the Monitor. He's a very egotistical person. He thinks, whatever he does and says is perfect. He is not a popular person amongst the crew, but more importantly, he gains the enmity of John Ericsson, because after the Battle of Drury's Bluff, Jeffers is going to write a report. And that report, and he writes it to Louis Malshibres Goldsborough, the commander of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron. But he goes into detail that he basically did not like the ship. That was the first sentence he goes. And then he says, the reason why I don't like it is because the captain could not control the ship from the pilot house. The pilot house should have been placed atop the turret. Okay, so that's what they're going to do afterwards. And you can see the tower above the tower. Many people call the turret the tower, but that is the new pilot house. It's right up there. Now and Ericsson writes back to all this stuff and says, Ericsson, I knew that, but we were in such a rush to get the ship to sea. Had I stopped to do that, the Monitor would not have saved the nation. And he liked to do that a lot, saying save the nation. My ship would not have been able to. So they make that change. However, the pilot house is extremely flawed. It does not have enough armor. And if you are a Confederate artilleryman at Fort Sumter and you see that thing, what are you going to shoot at? Well, that pilot house. You figure it's got to be something special. And actually, one officer, C.P.R. Rogers, will actually have a Brook bolt go through the pilot house. Of course, it goes through him as well. And John Worden at the battle against the Fort McAllister, the Big Okeechee River outside of Savannah, actually will say, a shot hit us and the bolts flew through the interior. They missed me by half an inch. And so that's not, in other words, it didn't have enough armor, and that was a huge problem. So anyway, that was number one problem for the first one. Number two, the turret did not have a full range of fire due to the location of the pilot house air intakes. Jeffers thought the range of fire to be 200 degrees rather than 360 degrees. And he is very right about that. Now, Ericson tries to solve this, but you really can't solve it perfectly. So the concept of a turret is, I have a full range of fire. Now remember, I just have one turret. So that means I'm supposed to have 360. That's what Ericsson said you'd have. But as you can see, I forgot I have a special thing. That number one, the pilot house is not there, so you have a pretty good shot. But they got to do something with the air intakes and the smokestack. And so this smokestack in the Passaic class is now going to be an armored smokestack, 5 inches of iron, right? So you can't blow it up and things like that as easily. Although the Confederates at the Battle of Charleston knock one over. So it just says it's only so good. And this is going to be, the Monitor does not have a full circuit of fire as advertised. So this ship is going to be flawed. Now, they try to solve this later by having twin turreted monitors, which really did have a 360 range of fire. But this one does not, and so the very purpose of the turret is somewhat limited. Now, you could only fire one gun at a time. You go there in the Monitor Center and look, 21 feet in diameter. And you put inside that turret 2 11-inch guns. They weigh each 16,000 pounds, okay? And so there's they can only fit 17 men inside the turret with those big guns, right? In fact, the first time they fire them, they don't fix the brakes right, and it bashes into the back of the turret, and you can actually see that. Now, they get so, I'll get ahead of myself, but, and one gun could only fire at one time, which was a problem, of course, in rate of fire. You're fighting a ship, and you think about the CSS Virginia. If it's broadside to you, it's going to have 5 cannon firing at you, which that rate of fire makes a huge difference. It took them 7 minutes to reload those Dahlgrens. So once again, you can see how slow it is, which makes it quite an effective combat vessel. He said the port stoppers, and they had what are called port stoppers, and they covered the porthole or the gun hole with these huge pendulums. They weighed 16 tons each. So you can well imagine when you fire that first you got to move them in, then you got to reload your gun. Well, they didn't do that very well during the Battle of the Ironclads. And actually, Ericsson says, "You dummy," to Jeffers. And he doesn't say dummy, but he says something just as bad. And that, don't you realize you just get to turn the turret away, and so you don't need those port stoppers. But that is a huge complaint. The gun ports don't allow for the proper elevation of the guns. Now, I want to tell you, you can see the gun port on the side here. This is the Montauk, that's the Nahant. And so you see that gun port. Well, the gun port's built in a way that when you are trying to depress your gun to fire at someone's hull, you can't depress it enough. Number two, you can't elevate the gun enough because the porthole's only so big. So that is another flaw in design. So during the Battle of Drury's Bluff, as we know, the Monitor only fires 3 shots, and it has no impact on the Fort Darling on top of Drury's Bluff. So it's a failed ship in that case. Now, he also says ventilation is intolerable. Now, just remember, this ship has blowers. The blowers are used to keep the fires going, as well as to send air through the ship. Now, the trouble with that air coming through the ship is it's brought from outside, and if you're July 1862 in a Monitor, that air outside is what? Humid. It also brings in what? Flies and mosquitoes. There are tons of complaints that this ship is unlivable. You don't see on pictures of the Monitor on the deck, you don't see people with bare feet. And there's a reason, because it's painted black. And so this is a huge problem in trying to operate the ship. I think my favorite line is William Keeler writes his wife and said, pardon that my perspiration has dropped on the page and ran my ink. And in that letter, he says, it's nothing but hot, hotter, hottest, and then in big letters, hot. Okay, so you can well imagine how terrible it was. So the ship is not designed with many creature comforts. It only had, a compression commode because everybody's living under the water. And this is a built up side armor here. This is the original side armor right there. And so they built it up after the war. Waste of money. In fact, it was a waste of money to actually build any Monitor. Now, notwithstanding, this is Jeffers, notwithstanding the recent battle on Hampton Roads and the exploit of the plated gunboats in western rivers, I am of the opinion that protecting the guns and gunners does not except in special cases, compensate for the greatly diminished quality of artillery, slow speed, and inferior accuracy. And because when you got that pilot house at the forefront where that little shack is, right, you can't really communicate with the crew. We all know about the stories that, they had a speaking trumpet, right? And that speaking trumpet did not, because the ship almost sank on the way down, especially off of Chincoteague, all the water got in the speaking trumpet, so it didn't work during the battle, so they had to have runners. Now, so Ericson says, well, I can fix all these things. And to Jeffers, he says, you don't really know what you're talking about. So they come up with the Passaic design, which we see right here. So there is the Passaic in action. Now, the Passaic is going to be commanded by John Lomer Worden, who by this time is considered the expert on Monitors. He knows everything about them. Well, he's going to, this is a scene during his attack on Fort McAllister, where he will try to prove. Now, the United States, let me just tell you, the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles, and especially the Assistant Secretary of Navy, Gustavus Vasa Fox, say, well, these Monitors are great. In fact, these Monitors are so great, we're going to capture Charleston, that cradle of secession. Everyone hated Charleston. And, well, everyone in the North hated Charleston. And so they wanted to get it. But the big thing is, DuPont, who's commander of the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, Admiral Samuel Francis DuPont, his uncle was the guy that invented the gunpowder, the guy that had all the money. His uncle ran a mill. But he was smart enough to marry his first cousin, so he got all that money. So anyway, I don't know that's why he really married the first cousin, but anyway, it's a great story. So here we come. This is a bad image of what the Montauk, which is this Passaic class monitor, would look like. Now he takes it into action three different times against Fort McAllister. Fort McAllister's an earthen fortification, right? And he gets within 1,000 yards of it, bombards it, but he is using shell guns and solid shot. And when you have an earthwork, the solid shot just goes right into it. The explosive shell does nothing to it, basically. And so Worden was really concerned about all those things. He was able to sink a ship while he's bombarding Fort McAllister, and that happened to be the former CSS Nashville, a tremendous commerce raider. However, when he's coming down river, he is going to run across a torpedo, and that's the keg-type torpedo. And actually, the greatest fear of any monitor, any ironclad, the thing that could really get them all, was a torpedo. So they ran across a torpedo, and it, of course, exploded, created a inch-long crack, fissure, as they call it, in the hull. The ship starts to sink. Worden is so quick-minded that he says, we're running her aground, and he mud patches it. And there's actually a nice sketch showing it out of the water. They're all looking at the fissure. And so this fissure is going to really say a lot about the Passaic class monitors. Remember, it's an improvement to the ships, the monitor itself. So what is wrong with these Passaic guns? Well, let me tell you. Worden is going to say, number one, it was badly struck by the fort, that it withstood all this gunfire. However, there were more problems. Problem number one, that little pilot house, Worden's in there when the bolts kind of fly around. So he says it doesn't have enough iron. The bolts need to be mounted in a different way, and they need to have what are called mantelets or bolt covers placed in it. Even though the monitor had them, they didn't think that the pilot house needed them. Error number one. He said it still didn't give, I mean, you get to look out this little slit like that to try and understand what you're doing. But he said, yes, the guns, the ship had good resistance. However, the big problem was that right, well, gosh, I can't get that working, but right there, that's where the turret comes into a ring, okay? And then there's a spindle that comes up and turns it. Well, the Confederates realized that's the spot we want to hit. And so basically, you could jam the turret very easily. Worden makes the recommendation, next time you build it, you need to put an iron cover, right, over it, so of sufficient armor, so the shot hits that versus the ring, because the ring could be disrupted in many ways. This is the Ericson style turret, and actually their superior style turrets built, but because Ericson was Ericsson, everyone says, oh, we got to use your turrets. And he says, of course you do. And but the English had built a better turret known as the Coles turret, that actually it operated on a cylinder that moved it, so that that fear of getting it jammed no longer existed. Okay, so and they also had the Eads turret that worked similar to the Coles turret. But what were most of our turrets made by? The Ericsson patent. Now he's got a patent on this bad boy. So that iron ring was important. He noted that the pilot house was extremely exposed and needed additional armor equal to the turret. The deck armor was 2 inches of iron plate. So what does that mean? That means plunging shot can go right through those 2 inches of armor. And actually, during the Battle of Charleston, April 7th, 1863, 2 of the ironclads, the Weehawken and the Catskills, actually, they're fighting Fort Sumter. You know, Fort Sumter has guns and parapet. They're shooting down on the monitors. The monitors can't fire back effectively. Actually, when they go fight that battle, you have 8 Passaic-class ships, then this ship called a Tower ironclad, the Keokuk, and then you have the new Ironsides. Well, I have to tell you that the big problem is that they can't fire fast enough to try and knock out the Fort Sumter's guns. The Confederates at that outer ring of fortifications has 170 heavy cannon. 8 monitors equal to 16 heavy cannon. Who's going to win? Well, we know now, after the thought, that the Confederates are. Now, so Ericson actually says, look, we don't need 11-inch Dahlgren in these guns, these ships. We need a rifled gun, and he suggests a 150 Parrott gun. The big reason is that against wooden fortification, the shell is going to screw into that earthwork and have better effect in breaking it down. Likewise, when you're fighting a fixed fortification, those rifled guns can do what? Chip away at the brickwork and actually cause some damage. And actually, the Passaic, commanded by Percival Drayden, will actually do that. And so you can see after action port where one of the guns in casemate will be damaged, and you can see the potholes in the brick around it. The Federals took the wrong approach because DuPont says shoot all the ones in parapet, because he was right, because there are 2 ships that get holes on the deck. It is said by Drayden that had there been a slight ripple in the seas, that the ship would have sunk. And so that shows you that we haven't solved all the problems with the monitors. Actually, all these notes come from my new book that's coming out in October, just to let you know. Anyway, so he said that, you know, monitors cannot reduce fixed fortifications. They don't have the firepower, they have resistance, but that's about it. So the Confederates or the Federals say, well, we don't care. We're just going to build more of them. And they go through a wide variety of styles of ironclads. This is Samuel DuPont, who led the attack on Charleston. He actually wrote Gustavus Fox saying, look, these monitors can't do it. Look at this report by John Worden after bombarding Fort Sumter, and he says this can't happen. This is not going to be successful. And as a result of that, DuPont is corrected. I mean, he's right, but he gets fired nonetheless because they said he just didn't use his ships well enough. They are vulnerable to torpedoes and plunging shot, and he knew that. Now, the Federals are going to keep going with their monitors. They're going to come up. This is why these monitors are proven to be a failure, and this is where they get to right here when they attack. They have to go by using this channel, this fort, and then they got to come in here where they're fighting against Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter. Confederate ironclads are back here. So it's a bad concept, and the ships are not right for them. And so that is something that Eric, and Worden also says, look, the United States Navy is being robbed, because when they start to really, after that, what happens to the Montauk, the torpedo, they go through the ship and they say, well, look, this is cheaper iron, right? They also did not use proper bolts. There was shoddy workmanship, all for the love of money. Now you can see G.W. Smith, Gustavus Vasa Fix, getting that, and he's going to go, you know, so what? You know, we need to build more. So I think the worst type of monitor the Federals are going to build is going to be what's known as the Well, not this one, but it is, well, this is a terrible ship, by the way. This is not a Monitor. This is called the Keokuk. It has towers, but they have one gun in each tower, which is going to, they have to put the guns on pivot. And it has, guess what this armor's like? 3 inches of armor plate, 1.5 inches of rubber, backed by 8 feet of wood. Now, I just want to tell you something. Why did they use rubber? Well, one designer, Charles Whitney, will say, well, gee whiz, the shot, if it gets through the armor, is going to bounce off the rubber. I don't think they thought about shell guns. And so that is a big thing, because the rubber doesn't bounce anything off. Shell gun explodes, the shell explodes, and that goes through the rubber. And they should have put rubber protecting the various joints within the ship. This thing gets hit 90 times by the Confederates, and it sinks. Okay. Now, no Monitor. This is not technically a Monitor. They called it a Monitor, but no Monitor really sinks from direct fire from a Confederate ship or fort. They do sink as a result of torpedoes because of that limited hull that is just not effective. Now, I think one of the things the Federals did, and which is really not very smart, is that they said, look, the Confederates made an ironclad out of the Merrimack, right? And so we can do that too. So after the Battle of Hampton Roads, they take one of the ships at Hampton Roads called the USS Roanoke, which is a steam screw frigate. They send it up to Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they cut it down and make it into an ironclad. Now, this ship is called still the Roanoke. It has 3 turrets, right? And think every turret is 120,000 tons. Every turret is has guns in it that are going to weigh anywhere from, well, you know, a nice 15-inch gun is 41,000 pounds. So, you know, just think about the weight. Now, what they did, see, the Confederates, when they cut down Virginia, they studied the displacement and the weight, and so they calculated that to make sure that the iron plate could withstand the hull. In the case of the Roanoke, they don't put any additional struts, and their extra knees they put in, and knees are right there at the deck, you know, below the deck, and they put some live oak ones in, but they did not put a new hog chain in. When I say a hog chain, that, you know, iron that goes from bow to stern to keep the thing from what's called hogging. But they don't put also any struts. They cut it down and actually have 6-inch iron plate on its sides, but they don't cut it down far enough because this ship has, you know, an 8-foot freeboard, so they don't think it's going to handle the sea very well. But because of the extent of the weight on top, the ship rolls, it sails down to Hampton Roads, they leave it there. Okay, take it back to New York, they leave it there, you know, and so it's not scrapped until the 1880s. Why do I say that monitors are flawed? And I say monitors are flawed because, well, this is the Keokuk sinking, of course. Whoops, I didn't want to go there yet. So why are they flawed? Let's go through the reasons why they should have never made them. Well, they had to make them because it was an alternative what the Confederates were doing. But the big, I think, point is that they do not improve the monitors based on the experience that people are having. They should have had a better armored deck. They should not have had that overhang. One brilliant person, Albin Steimer, says, well, I will solve it all. And he designs what are called the Casco monitors, right? And they're going to have a 1.5-inch freeboard, but when they are built, they actually, Joseph Smith says, why don't we put some water tanks so you can lower it even more in the water? Well, I have to tell you, the ship had such a 1.5-inch freeboard. You know, I just want you to think about going out into the Atlantic in one of those, that they could not put a turret on top of the design because it would cause it to sink. So instead, they put a cannon there and what's called parapet. So, oh, this is just as good as a torpedo boat. Well, so the federal government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on building different monitors during the Civil War. And they don't give up on it. I think I gave a lecture some time ago about new Navy monitors. They don't give up on this design until the turn of the century. So I want to just ask you, a monitor or a tower ship, it goes up against, like the HMS Dreadnought, who's going to win? Well, not the monitor. And so it's a design that works one day and will actually work to maintain the Union control of the seas, but it's not a ship that can go chase after the Alabama. It's not a ship that can really be stationed on the blockade, because when you're out at sea, you never know what's going to come up. One of those monitors, the Weehawken, has its hatch open. They had been loading ammunition. It's a little down by the stern, and guess what? A wave comes, slight storm comes, and guess what happens? It sinks because the water goes into the hatch, down it goes. I think it lasted about a minute and a half above the water. But that shows you that monitors got a thought of greatness, because when they fight ships in closed waters, CSS Atlanta, CSS Tennessee, they're successful. They're successful because their armament, they're firing like this. So it means that the design of a harbor defense ship, it's perfect. But to do anything else with a monitor was next to impossible. Yes, they make ocean-going monitors. One goes around the Cape Horn, which I would have been sick before the ship left, and I would have selected not to go on board. But the thing is that once you invest in a design, oftentimes you keep trying to improve that design, even though it's inherently wrong. They never solve this overhang problem, even though you read everything but people are saying that is the problem. They never really solve the armored deck protection. And so as a result of that, monitors during the Civil War are successful in harbor actions. They are not good for blockade. They're not good for chasing down cruisers. That means the U.S. Navy continues to build wooden ships during the Civil War and actually through the 1870s, because they'd given out all these contracts. So why do I say failed monitors? Well, who disagrees with me? Well, I didn't think so. So the bottom line is that we cherish the monitor here because it is the ship that changed the nation. It does introduce the turret into warfare. It does introduce how people can live under the water on a ship. But it is the beginning, and it's going to take tremendous changes that will occur in the post-Civil War era with fleets in Europe, not in America. By 1865, we have the largest fleet in the world. 1880, we have the 13th strongest fleet in the world. That's because we relied on monitors. I want to thank you all for this year. It's been very great. Next year, I'm just going to be doing one lecture per, I think I'm going to be doing 19 lectures next year. I did break my neck this year and have a heart attack, so I kind of conserve a little energy. But I appreciate you all watching from afar and coming in here. I think it's important for us to recognize how we think we have a perfect design, but we don't. We still use it. But the bottom line is the monitor helped win the war for the Union. It taps that industrial strength and actually enables us to build upon the industrial strength that was just first starting in our industrial revolution, but it makes it full blown. And that's what makes a difference. Okay. Thank you all.